Alrighty, I'm going to answer the question, navy bean chowder. Now, most times when people have an experience of navy bean soup, it tends to be a little bit pureed. Now, I'm going to give you a recipe and demonstrate the formula and technique with that recipe that will allow you to either serve it as a chowder, meaning a broth with food in it, or you can also make it into that kind of navy bean that's a little pureed by pureeing some of the beans and adding them back into the beans a little bit to give it a little body. And I'm going to show you both versions in the finished bowl on this soup when we're done here, okay? We're going to start out by adding the rendered bacon to the pot we're going to cook the soup in, okay? And the bacon fat, that's what you got to have. I got about a half a cup, 3/4 of a cup. And there's the bacon. And we're going to add the mirepoix, celery, carrots, and onions in accordance to the ingredient list that you have. We're going to use a little bit of thyme also in this soup, dried thyme. You can use fresh thyme if you want, because we're going to add some fresh herbs to this original cooking process, and we're going to use chicken stock. Now, we're going to end up garnishing this soup with a little bit of green cabbage and blue cheese, and that'll be an option. But you'll find that this process, mirepoix, bacon, tomato concasse, mushrooms, garlic, stock, and beans, is a good formula for just about any kind of bean soup you want to make, all right? I'm going to cook that just a little bit. Now, one of the things about the navy beans, which you should be aware of when you proceed to make the soup or you begin to plan for making this soup, is number one, these beans need to be soaked overnight in the refrigerator. You do not soak beans out of the refrigerator or anywhere, any kind of bean. They have a tendency, they can go sour on you overnight in your house. Now the tomato concasse, which is in the earlier part of this text, and you can click on that when you need to know how to make it, but we have some pre-made for the recipe here. And these veggies are looking good. I'm going to add the mushrooms in here, and I'm going to add a little bit of butter. Your recipe tells you that if you don't have enough bacon fat in here based on the amount of bacon that you're adding to it, supplement it with a little bit of butter. So we'll throw a little chunk of butter in here. And we're going to use some fresh tarragon. Those are my soaked beans right there. Fresh tarragon, a little bit of basil, and a little bit of parsley combined. I'm going to throw that in the original cooking process. And then at the end of the cooking process, we can add some more fresh herbs to them, or even sprinkle some on each individual bowl if we wanted to, you know. They certainly add a nice touch to the item. This is the fresh tarragon. And this is the basil. You don't want any of the stems from the tarragon in there. They're a little tough. It's a little bit like putting rosemary stems in something. They're just a little too tough for things for most of us to eat also. Okay, there's a little bit of tarragon, a little bit of basil. Let's chop that up. Let's add that to the pot. And let's stir that around for a second. Let's give it one more minute to cook, and let me finish that thought I had about when you plan to make navy bean soup. A couple of things that you should consider. One, navy beans, even though they're soaked overnight in cold water, they take an extended period of time, among beans that is, to get tender enough to eat. So you may have to cook this for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, depending on how high you have it cooked, before they're tender enough to eat. So you need a little more planning when you make these versus when you make lentil soup or black bean soup, for example. They're both much, much quicker, lentil being the quickest of these three I just mentioned. Okay, now I'm going to show you where the veg is here. And as you can see, the veg is half to 3/4 of the way sauteed. Looks nice. And keep in mind now, when you're cutting your mirepoix, the celery, carrots, and onions for this type of soup, and this soup specifically, that you want to cut them in accordance to the size that you want them to be when they're on the person's spoon when they're eating the soup. You don't want a giant carrot and a little piece of celery and so on. Not only do you want them consistent, but you want them an appropriate size so that they're comfortable to eat. Okay? So now we're going to add the garlic. And we're going to add the tomato concasse. And we're going to add the navy beans. I think I got enough right there. And we're going to add the chicken stock. And we're going to take a long time out for these navy beans to be cooked until they're tender enough to eat. And one of the things that's going to take place during this time elapsed period, which may be as long as an hour before I come back to you immediately, which I will, but in real time it will have been another hour that had passed, is you're going to be constantly topping off this soup so that the food is always covered with the stock. Now, once you've had a certain amount of stock added to it, if it keeps reducing, you may want to just add water to it rather than more stock, because you may end up making the soup too rich by continually adding stock to it that keeps reducing. In effect, you might want to, halfway through the addition of chicken stock, stop and start adding water. You're basically just reconstituting the reduced stock that's already there. Just want to make sure that you have enough liquid in the pot, both when you're done and during the cooking process, okay? So let's just add a little more stock to that because that's going to absorb a lot. And I'll let you take a peek at that real quick so you can see the amount of food that we have in here, see, per liquid. Looks nice already. I love the way this soup looks, you know. There's something about these chowders when the vegetables are handled properly that's really nice. So we're going to time elapse this for whatever length of time it takes, and I will time it and tell you how long it took these particular beans to become tender enough to eat. So I'll be back when they are, and then we'll pick up on where we left off. All right, we're rolling back on the completion of the navy bean chowder. Now, the navy beans, like I told you, these took about an hour to become tender enough to eat, and they're ready now. And now we're going to show you that one of the many finishing processes that you can employ to complete this soup. Now, I'll let you take a look at this soup here the best you can. You see you got a little bit of fat on the top of the soup from the bacon, and that's okay, but you see how nice this soup looks. Now, how we finish this is going to make a big difference. There's a couple of things we're going to do, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get salt and pepper in here that belongs in here, okay? Now, you want to put fresh herbs in your can. We're just going to put chopped parsley in here, all right? But first, let's take a little bit of this fat off the top and discard it. Getting just a little bit too greasy here. There we go. I ended up taking about 6 ounces of fat off the top. Now, let's give it a taste first. This is good. It needs a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, not much. This soup is, boom, ready to go. This is nice. Now I'm going to show you a few different things you can do with this soup, which are kind of neat. The first one is, that's great. The first one is that you can serve the beans as beans if you wanted to. And don't quite put as much stock in there. Now you got a nice starch there, the navy beans, you see? And that by itself is a nice vegetable. Mix a little chopped parsley in with that or some fresh herbs, and you're great. Not a vegetable, more like a starch or a veg, whatever, or a combo. Okay, so that's something that you can do with this formula, all right, which is kind of nice. And now that it's seasoned enough, we're going to go on ahead, and I'm going to finish this the way I think is a nice way to finish it. One of them is I got a little bit of blanched green cabbage, which I dropped in boiling salted water and then shocked in ice water. Regular green cabbage in fairly decent-sized pieces, though, you see? I'm going to lay some of that in that bowl. And we're going to ladle some of this soup in here. Oop. Try to avoid that. Okay. soup looks nice already, doesn't it? Look at that. Again, you want to be careful. The amount of juice to food is proportionately okay. Now, we can take a few peas and put them on there. And I say we take a little piece of blue cheese and we stick it in the middle of that soup. Now, that's one way of doing it. And actually, I've shown you two ways. One, just serve it as a bean. Second, like this here. And now, another way I'm going to do it is I'm going to puree a little bit of the navy beans in here and then put them back in and incorporate it back in the soup to add a little bit of body to the soup, okay? So let's take some of this with the beans and puree it with the blender stick and then pour it back into the soup, okay? Now, of course, if you want to put sausage or pieces of lamb or pork or all kinds of stuff with this, you can do it. It's wonderful, you know? Let's zap this. Okay, now let's put this back in the soup. Now the soup's not like a chowder anymore. It's kind of like a bean puree soup a little bit now, okay? It's got a slightly different look. It's got a little bit of body mixed into it now. That's nice. And this one also, I would certainly recommend a little bit of cabbage in there, a couple of peas, and a little bit of that cheese. That's nice. Nice to kind of put the cheese in the middle of the soup. We'll sprinkle a little bit of chopped parsley on here. I think in this case, maybe we'll put a little smidgen of tomato concasse on here too if we want to. Just put a little, although we have tomato concasse in the soup, we have a little bit on top now, give it a little bit more color and bring it to life for you a little bit. So there you go. There's a navy bean chowder, and this is this whole process by which we make some of these bean soups, the black bean, the lentil, the navy bean with bacon, mirepoix, garlic, stock, and then we simmer them. This process is consistent with these kind of soups, and the reason so is because they turn out so nice this way. So you enjoy playing with this soup, and this is particularly good for the cold weather. If you're watching this from up north, you might be able to appreciate this more than some of the people down in Florida here where we're filming this. But I love it, and I hope you enjoy it.